Holistic by Shiana.
Hi, it's Shiana. Welcome to Who You Callin' Holistic. I am recording today at GOT Sound Studio. Shout out to Neek. Make sure you are on my email list. Make sure you check out the show notes for any updates you may need to see on any events I have going on or upcoming offerings, classes. You already know. Check the show notes. Always check the show notes. But today I'm joined by my guest, Shannon. Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And let me give a little backstory on Shannon. So Shannon and I met in 2019, and I had mentioned on a couple episodes ago, probably, like I've referenced you more than once, by the way. Like I know you're not a podcast listener yet, but I've referenced your work and what Myofascial Release is often on here. And I wanted to share, like, a lot of people know that whenever I started this podcast, it wasn't originally a podcast. Like, the podcast came after my original idea was to have this be a web series, a video web series to explore alternative therapies and especially have people who wouldn't typically experience these alternative therapies to try them out. And you can set that down, girl. And so we ended up recording a video, which was really, really cool. And then I don't know if Mercury was in retrograde or something. Anyway, the video never got aired. We never had full footage of the experience, but I brought in a homeboy that got to try out your work who had like experienced gunshots and like all sorts of trauma like over the years. So he learned things about himself and you taught things about him. So anyway, I wanted to give that backstory because like Shannon's work, myofascial release stuff has been in the mix of what I've wanted to share on alternative therapies since the beginning of Who You Callin' Holistic. Just some perspective. All right. So whenever I talk about myofascial release, whenever I'm sharing it with people, I like, like bullet points. So I'm always like, myofascial release helps address the trauma in your tissues or addresses your issues in your tissues due to traumas. So what is your explanation of myofascial release?
First, you'd have to know what fascia is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the best example I can give is like, say you've got some raw chicken and you peel back the skin and you see that sort of jello-y, spiderwebby stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, that's in us too. And it's not just under our skin. It's a three-dimensional web that's everything. It's the environment of everything. It's why we don't collapse. It's our scaffolding. It holds us together. But that webbing is only 20% of the whole fascial system. The rest is what I like to call the electric jello. So if you've ever cooked a ham and you get that gelatin, right? Well, that's us too, and that's what that is. And all of it collects, well, it holds an electrical charge, and electricity goes through it, light photons at the speed of light. So it's basically our body's fiber optic network of communication, orders of magnitude faster than any nerve impulse. And when a signal is sent through the body, it's sent everywhere all at once, not just along a nerve pathway, which means all the cofactors in the whole body that need to know some new information as something's being released or something's being restricted, you affect the whole body.
Right.
It's like pulling on a sweater. You're not just pulling on one part, you're pulling on all of it. So things like surgeries, injuries, traumas, even cumulative microtraumas. So
what would be considered a microtrauma?
You're 2 years old or 1 year old, right? Like my baby granddaughter, and you fall down all the time trying to walk. Every time you hit, boom, it's a cumulative microtrauma. Things that we wouldn't even necessarily call a big thing, but to that 1 year old psyche, that is a big thing, right? And how they felt when they did fall. What was the response from the people in their lives?
Right, because you've seen when kids fall, and it's like, don't make a big deal out of it, and then it's fine. But if you're like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And then they're like wailing and crying, like, help! Like they become helpless in a sense,
right?
A lot of times.
And the other way too, though, also making sure that they feel nurtured if they really do hurt themselves,
right.
So, myofascial release to me is like if you took all that fascia we were just talking about, that's supposed to be plasma, like almost like a watery honey, and you now let it crystallize like old honey. things inside aren't going to glide anymore, right? So it's the environment of everything. So it's the one system that controls all systems. Your nervous system, your respiratory, every system, circulatory, lymph, especially lymph, your immune system, everything is embedded and interpenetrated by this fascia. So when you've got a spot that's supposed to glide and now it's sticking, you're affecting flow, like bending up a drinking straw. Okay, and so things aren't flowing anymore. So with myofascial release therapy, we're melting things in those like crystallized honey places and letting it go back to honey, right? And there's a lot of complex processes that happen. It's to some people it's woo-woo. To other people, no, there's tons of science. In fact, this Saturday right now in the UK is the British Fascia Symposium. And Dr. Carol Davis, who was actually one of my first, she was my very first teacher, is going to be presenting there.
Oh, nice.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I tell people on here too, like I like to bridge the woo-woo with the science as well. So like I like to share all aspects of all of it because everything's a spectrum anyway.
Right.
So it's good to have that mix. But had I not personally experienced it and I had only seen videos of it, or because if you go online, if you go on Instagram, if you go on TikTok, like a lot of the videos might just show somebody touching a space for a little bit while the client is screaming.
Right.
Like there's so much of that.
It's the old way. It's the pin and stretch. We learned it in massage school too. And so almost every massage therapist says, I do myofascial release. Well, there's a certain approach to it though that I do, and that's the John Barnes approach. So John's a physical therapist and also a massage therapist. He's 85 years old and still teaching and healing people today. And he figured out over 60 years ago that you had to hold this fascia, you had to romance it, right, for 3 to 5 minutes minimum in order for some of these processes to happen where it wants to melt. And the whole idea is that creates a feeling of safety inside someone. And when someone feels safe inside themselves, then the body's automatic healing processes kick in. When we don't feel safe in a certain part of our body, we're frozen there and stuck. Yeah.
It's like the true definition and embodiment of fight or flight.
Exactly.
Like your body is just stuck in these traumatic and like
Patterns.
sticky patterns.
Yeah, and it's like a feedback loop. And so then what happens is you go into fight and fight for long enough, you become so exhausted, parasympathetic now tries to kick in. And now it's 1 foot on the gas and 1 foot on the brake. And now we have the freeze response. And you see this in nature all the time. So the bunny sees the hawk. Right?
And I shared this story. But share it again. Because I reference this one a lot. Because it's very fitting for everybody to understand this visual.
Right. So the bunny sees the hawk. It knows it can't fight a hawk. It knows it can't run fast enough. And so it shuts itself down. If it's lucky enough to survive, the hawk comes and goes, oh, dead bunny. It starts to shake violently first, and then it hops off to the safety of the woods. We don't shake when these things happen to us, right? We stuff it. We stuff it here, we stuff it there, whatever, and it becomes frozen fear. So there's like 2 ways that I've seen and experienced it myself, the thawing of the freeze response that I think some people might be able to relate to. One is the new mama shakes after giving birth. Teeth are chattering, you're so cold, your body's shaking. The nurses know to let you play that out. They don't try to hold your hand and say, okay, it's going to be okay. No. They say, just let it shake. And the other one's coming out of anesthesia after surgery. Some people also I've experienced that too. You're just bone-chilling cold, and it's the thawing of the freeze response. It's a natural part of the nervous system trying to reset itself.
Okay.
And this can happen for a few minutes, or it can happen for a few hours. There is a extremely popular TikTok video where I'm holding somebody and he is shaking and sweating profusely. His daughter videoed it with his permission, and I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, this is shaking the pain out of my body.
But wasn't screaming.
No, he wasn't screaming. He's sweating.
Yeah. And I've seen and experienced. I haven't experienced like what I've seen on some of those where I'm like, no, thank you. Where they're just like screaming and wailing and like twisting their bodies, but that's a whole other level of the healing you've explained too.
And experience personally.
Yeah.
Right, because what happens is that we get a thwarted inflammatory response. Something was so overwhelming, we couldn't bear it. And so we shut down. We became like the bunny, right? And sometimes it's like you push the play button. And if and only if that person's body, their fascia, is ready today at this moment to release it, then that could happen. The sound, it comes up like a volcano.
Yeah.
There's no stopping.
Yeah.
You don't even want to try. The arms going, or legs or whatever, go into a spontaneous movement. And what I tell people is like, the best reference you have to this is a seizure, but this is not a seizure. If you are a bunch of twisted rubber bands encased in crystallized honey, and the honey starts to melt, some of them are going to go like this. But some of them are going to go spastic, and the body might too. It's a discharge of energy. A lot of times it's accompanied by a lot of heat, a lot of sweating, and then followed by incredible cold. And I tell people, if you're a block of ice and you start melting, you're going to feel cold first before you start feeling warm again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I even have a similar experience, like you mentioned, with the outburst of the emotions or the movement that needs to take place. And I just mentioned this to somebody recently, especially if I have a client that's been on antidepressants or like the ones that really numb you, I guess the SSRIs in a sense. And
opiates.
Yeah. Yep. Those too. But a lot of times, but I'm mentioning antidepressants in particular because it's that like they feel like they need to emote, but it's been like a Band-Aid's been put on it basically. And then they come in for like sound healing or Reiki, and like they have this outburst of like hysterical crying that they're like, where did that come from? And it's just like this big like wailing kind of thing. And they're confused about it, but it's like or I've said it like a hose, but you mentioned like a straw. The impingement on the straw doesn't allow the flow. So it's the same with the energy.
And sometimes it is a fire hose of emotion, right? And so we just say, give yourself permission to feel that. Because for whatever reason, like maybe you shut that down because you had to go to work, right? Or you don't want to look like you're breaking down in front of your kids. Or if it's a man, you don't want to look like you're breaking down in front of anybody. Right. And so I got drums in my studio. You've seen them. So I've got, a lot of times men, they don't have a way to appropriately get rid of their anger. So I say, hey, just start beating on this. And before you know it, they're wailing on it. Yeah. And that's how they're getting it out. And it's safe. It's a safe place to come home to yourself.
And I wish, we are using microphones so we can speak that into existence. But I was like, I wish more men would get treatment of myofascial release because I already know, like you said, they don't have like a role model to learn how to express themselves a lot of ways, in all the ways, unless they do have that safety around them growing up, which I feel like my generation and your generation, like they did not, or the majority of them didn't, because we had, the working parents all the time. And it's like, we don't have time for those things that have come up. Like, we'll get to that later. Right. And then it's just a passed down thing. And now it's stuck in our tissues.
Exactly. And that also brings up this. Sometimes there's bewildering things that happen inside. Your eyes are closed and you're seeing what looks like a kaleidoscope in your eyes, right? Could be colors, could be images, could be like you feel like you are watching a movie. It could be your own life, something you've experienced. But then sometimes it's stuff that doesn't make sense. And that's the subconscious mind speaking to you in symbols, or it could be ancestral. Because that's in our DNA, whatever my Viking ancestors may have done to yours could be trapped in, the DNA, right? Yeah. And that's getting itself out. And, for those who believe in past lives, and I'll go there because this is an area where it was this like, I was originally an environmental scientist. So trying to convince me of that was like, Well, the things I started to experience while being treated, I even asked John Barnes. And he said, do you believe in past lives? I said, I think I have to now. Just because it's like, holy cow. Yet at the same time, it's like, well, we can go, well, so what? What does that mean? So then we ask, what is that experience trying to do to help me in this life? Right.
Yeah. And I've talked about past lives on here too. So those listening are familiar as well, because it's very much like how can you not make sense of that in a lot of ways? If you think of energy just being recycled and restored and regenerated, it only makes sense.
It does. But if it's still somebody's belief system can't accept that, there's still ancestry. And so then there's, a lot of times we try to then attach a story to something. And what I try to tell people is you're trying to find meaning in this because your conscious mind is trying to figure out a subconscious process. Okay. And so John calls that conscious mind channel 5, and he calls the subconscious feeling channel 3. Right? And we need to be in channel 3 for healing. One of the most profound things that ever happened to me is I was being treated at the Myofascial Treatment Center outside of Philadelphia, and my body started shaking uncontrollably for 90 minutes. I was by myself. The therapist had left the room. You get to spend, as long as you want in the room, right? And I'm still in the room. So finally I can't stand it. And I go out into the hall, put on my bathrobe, go out in the hall, and I get...
Still shaking?
Still shaking, bring the therapist in, and then I lay down on the table and I recreate the posture I was in. And I said, why is this happening and why won't it stop? And she rocked my world. And she said, if you knew the answer, would it make any difference? My brain goes through lightning speed decision trees and all these possibilities, and eventually I go, no. The message was that I had to feel something that I couldn't feel before. That's the message. And to try to attach stories to it limits it. It's the feeling. We tell people, try to feel the feeling under the feeling.
And that's what going to therapy is about too, because it's the same like questioning.
Yes.
Like, and what brought you to that? And let's unpack that. And then let's unpack that. It's the same. It's just the mental,
right?
More so than the mind-body.
But it's all interwoven.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So how can myofascial release help people with chronic conditions then, given past life history or ancestral or just
their own life?
Current life history.
Right. So a lot of those chronic conditions is, their nervous system is exhausted, right? They are either anxious all the time or maybe depressed all the time, and they don't have nervous system sovereignty. Imagine taking a webbing inside your body and putting it on clench 24/7, repeating every bracing pattern every time you checked out of your body all the time. So it's not just one, it's layers. John calls it splat art, layer after layer after layer and they're all interwoven, right? And they don't come off like layers of an onion. They don't. It's uglier than that. It is, right? And repeat your question because I kind of got off track in my head.
How does MFR help with chronic conditions?
So now that is like an emergency brake on your nervous system. So myofascial release takes the tension off the system body-wide. It's not just you're here for your hip or you're here for your shoulder or your neck. It's the tension on the whole system. So then people start going, I used to wake up in the middle of the night all the time and then not be able to go back to sleep. I'm sleeping through the night. Or I got up, 5 times to urinate in the middle of the night and now I'm sleeping through the night or only get up once. Or my digestion, I've got this diagnosis of whatever, and now I've got good digestion because my stomach's not all in knots. So what we tell people is look past the label of that diagnosis, because what John says is that a diagnosis is a myopic description of symptoms. Very tunnel vision, right? Because it's not looking at the whole person.
Ever.
It's just looking at a spot. And so, in terms of like, how would this differ from physical therapy, even though it's a type of physical therapy, is when I went to a traditional physical therapist for some of my injuries, I was there for a shoulder. I was there for a knee. No one looked at the fact that that knee was part of an entire leg that included the hip and the foot, and the whole thing was twisted, right? Same thing with the whole shoulder girdle. It wasn't until I was a patient of myofascial release where someone looked at me as a whole person, and which then led me, because I had what they were starting to call chronic fibromyalgia.
We've talked about that on here too.
Yeah.
So it's a common diagnosis.
Yeah, to me, I think it's when they don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
And they try not to insult you by telling you it's in your head, but sometimes they do try to insult you and tell you it's in your head. And I can remember my orthopedist saying, I can't continue to prescribe you these medications to kill your pain. And I said, well, send me to a rheumatologist. And so he does. And they do all the tests, and they said, you have 75% of the markers of fibromyalgia. That's, what does that mean? We're going to act as if you do. I said, oh, okay, what does that mean?
Right.
We're going to send you to a pain management specialist. I'm like, oh, wonderful. Someone's going to get me out of pain. And they're like, oh, no, dear.
It'll just be managed.
No, they're going to manage your pain. We're going to give you a new drug pusher, basically.
Right,
is what it meant. Well,
the American way.
Yeah, he was really a progressive, though. And I kept going, this is so degrading. This is really, I can't live like this. The side effects from the painkillers, I don't like those. And I don't want to be that person who's on this for the rest of my life.
Right.
Right. And so he had just gotten a brochure from someone who did myofascial release.
Of course.
And I'm going to just tell you who this is, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hema Dalal. She saved my life, okay? Now, if any of you are Lady Gamecock fans, you may have noticed at that State House celebration, she walked up the ramp with John Staley. Yeah. Why do those players get back in the game so quick? Because she's doing myofascial release with them. Absolutely. So it's being done in sports. It's being done in, all different areas. But what Hema told me when I went in is you can't strengthen what you can't stretch. And you can't stretch it if you're in a straitjacket. And Shannon, you're in a straitjacket.
That sounds like some shit Shiana says.
And I was, but guess what kind it was? It was an emotional straitjacket.
It usually is.
It was totally interwoven with that shoulder issue, and then that later tailbone issue, and then that later plantar fasciitis issue. All those things, and she would touch my belly, and all of a sudden, like a tear would go down. I'm like, I don't even know what that's from.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from? And then I felt so much better, though.
Well, when I first saw you, and again, you were a stranger to me, and for those who know me, they know, like, I don't like to publicly cry already. Even those who are close to me, like, again, it's probably a safety thing, but also I like to hermit and cry kind of thing. But when I've had friends over, they're like, you can cry, it's fine, whatever. And I'm like, like, I'll schedule it later kind of thing or whatever. Right. And I guess at the time I'd seen you, I'd scheduled too many of them or something. And then not stranger danger, but in my head, this stranger. And you were working on something in my, like, the session was almost over, I feel like. And you went to release something in my rib cage. And then I just started crying. And I was like, what the fuck? You just touched my rib. Like, what? And then you were like, grief likes to hide sometimes or something like that. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, what do you mean grief is hiding? And then, it made sense, of course, because I had already had an understanding of chakras and the mind body. I'd already had that, but still it was like, why was it hiding in that particular, you know what I mean? Right. Like, why did it choose that spot?
Yeah, and it's not limited to that. We know a lot of times, the lungs, their grief, and the liver's anger and all that. Here's the thing, though. It's all positions in space. What position in space were you when you were grieving?
Right.
When you get the phone call at 3 a.m, it says your dad died.
Right.
So now your shoulder's in this position.
Yep.
So when you're on the table, if you're ready to release that, your body may move you into this position so that you feel that pain, complete the process, and then feel it's safe now. It's safe to feel. It's safe to bring this arm back home. It's safe to breathe. I've given this emotion its due and its emotion. Now it has moved instead of been lodged in my shoulder.
And on the note that you mentioned with the micro traumas, and I had like a whole self-care September series where I shared different modalities I've tried over the years. And I like shared some of my experience with myofascial release, but I mentioned how whenever you see a practitioner, they get like your entire history of like, what all have you experienced? And like, what was your birth like? What was, like, have you been in fights? Have you all the things? And how I was like, oh yeah, whenever I was born, the umbilical cord was caught around my throat. And you were like, yeah, don't you think that has something to do? And I was like, damn, yeah, okay, I guess so. Yeah. But didn't think, anybody was going to address the umbilical cord that was caught around my throat at birth, in my healing later on down the line. So it's just all wild how it all connects. I mean, it makes sense, but also it's still just, it sounds so woo-woo, but it doesn't sound woo-woo at all.
No, it just makes too much sense. Yeah, it really does.
Like, even if people are like, science, it's still like, how can you not see the connection with this kind of work? Yeah. Especially when you've experienced it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, though, there are some skeptics, right? So they'll be like, well, can you see this on an x-ray? Can you see this on an MRI? Can you see these restrictions? You cannot see them on any standard imaging except for one thing, which is not considered standard imaging, a thermogram. When people come to me with thermograms, those yellow, orange, and red spots on there totally correspond to where they're inflamed, and those blue spots are totally where they don't have any circulation, and I can feel that too.
Right.
So, yeah, they're pretty just right on.
Yeah, and I've actually, I've created a reel. I created some videos for the place here, for those who are listening in Colombia, about your health, because they do thermography readings. Because it's also a good alternative for mammograms and stuff too.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, they can show you where you have restriction. And as you're saying that, which I had already had sinus stuff before, which was my introduction, a lot of my introduction to the holistic world, because they gave me medication after medication, and then acupuncture ended up helping. Then I saw you for treatment. But even when I've been treated with you recently, we worked on my, what do you call it? The butterfly?
The butterfly bone.
Butterfly bone.
The sphenoid.
Yes. And in my thermography reading, that was like blue. And I had that, I guess, last year sometime. But explain the butterfly sphenoid bone. What is that? And especially
magical.
If people aren't watching this, explain where it is and what it does.
Right. It's so deep inside your face that you really can't access it unless you go to that bone right on the edge of your eyes, and then go just a little bit backward. And that is the tips of the greater wings of the thing. So it's like a mask inside your head. It's behind your eyes and nose, and it actually is one of the bones of your eye socket. All right. It connects with every one of your facial bones, including every bone that has a sinus. It has a sinus. All right. Now, here's the thing. That is connected by this tube, all right, that goes like an internal mohawk, like this, under your skull. And that tube then surrounds your spinal cord. It goes all the way down to your sacrum, which is that flat bone right there at the end of your spine. Right? If your pelvis is twisted, the butterfly bone is twisted. If the butterfly bone is twisted, the pelvis is twisted. All right? And so there's different ways to access that bone. It is huge for proprioception. It is the where am I in space bone. So it's constantly talking to the sacrum back there, going, where are we? And so if there's a sudden motion of someone falling, then it sends these lightning speed signals to the rest of the body. Employ countermeasures, body's falling, and the arms start flailing, everything, brace yourself, whatever, so that you don't hurt yourself as bad. The other thing that's really cool about this bone is that the pituitary gland sits on it. And so the gentle rocking between the sphenoid and the sacrum milks the pituitary gland, which is the master gland that tells all the other glands when to release their hormones. So if someone's having those night sweats, right, and they're not even menopausal or even perimenopausal, there could be hormone issues going on just simply because you're twisted in this dural tube.
Right.
Okay. And so getting that to balances so many things. It balances vision problems. Also remember that the roof of your mouth is the floor of your sinuses. So that's another way of accessing that. If you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, sometimes you'll feel this little speed bump thing. And that's where this little projection comes down off the sphenoid called the vomer. And the vomer is like your tailbone, and the sphenoid is like your sacrum. In fact, they're kind of shaped the same too. It's kind of a parallel design.
It's like the jaws and hips look very similar.
Exactly. And so there's different ways to access all this to bring tremendous relief to people.
Interesting. Yeah. Once I'm advanced enough to have these kinds of things, it'd be cool to have, like this whole like holographic visual of it spinning as you're explaining this diagram. That's what I can see anyway, because I can see these bones and parts connecting, and I'm like, I hope these other people, it'd be cool to display it over our heads.
Oh, it would. Well,
nice.
See, it's interesting you say hologram, because, see, it's actually the hologram that's healing us. Okay? So there is a disruption in the auric field, in the hologram, not just the body. And so sometimes I don't touch people. I can be in the energy field. Some people, well, is this Reiki? And I'm Reiki certified as well. But it's different than Reiki. You can tell when you feel it, right? And we can move the energy off the body. I have held my hands off someone's body, and they have just started shaking uncontrollably just from being there. Sometimes people are too sensitive. They're so out of their body that they go to the edge of the room, They're that far. And so we help bring them
Their
back
aura.
in. Well, not just their aura. And it's not like, oh, look at me, I got a big energy field. No, they are so disassociated. It's so out of their body that we help bring them back into their body. And sometimes it's like a space shuttle coming back in. There's a lot of shaking that happens in that process and a lot of fear. And so we just help them do that safely. And then and also say sometimes, if you need to go back out, just start thinking about anything else. Because as soon as you go into thinking, then you're not into feeling.
Right. So what are some other signs that you recognize in whether it's your clients or those that are listening that can show that maybe they are getting that much outside of their body, that they've created that disconnect and it may contribute to their...
It does contribute.
Well, yeah. So yeah, what are some of the symptoms and signs that people may not even realize that they're experiencing?
How did I get that bruise? They're bumping into door frames and furniture. Because when you are totally embodied, your feeling awareness is embodied, it protects you. And you have this almost sixth sense. The door frame's there, the coffee table's there, and you don't bump into it, right? Someone's having a conversation with you, you hear them perfectly, but you have to have them repeat it because you were checked out and you weren't present and you weren't even looking at your phone. But so these kinds of things. Just kind of real simple that someone's not in their body. I can remember the first time I got to feel what that was like. And once again, I was up at that treatment center outside of Philadelphia. I was after lunch and the therapist walks in. And right before she walks in, I had this thought. I'm laying there waiting for her. I'm like, this is odd. I know they're attached because they get me where I need to go. But right now it feels like my legs aren't even there. She walks in. I didn't say that out loud. She puts her hands on my legs and she says, Shannon, I want to invite you back into your body, especially your legs. My eyes fly wide open. And I'm like, who are these magic people who can read my thoughts? Right? But you can, there's also a way that the tissue feels. It feels very spongy when somebody's not in there. Yeah. Almost like completely like they're a water balloon. Yeah.
Yeah. And I even tell people, like when I've worked on them, because especially with women, you have to be careful what words you're going to use when you're like, you want this to feel this way, So whenever I've worked on people with like just brick fascia, it's just so solid and you finally get it to release and relax a little bit. And it's like, oh yeah, now that's fluffy. And they're like, fluffy? But you want some fluff to it. You don't want it just to sponge and stick.
We want it to be fluid. Yes. So everything can glide.
Yes. Because they're like fluffy. And I'm like, listen, it's better than jerky. Like you don't want jerky skin.
You don't want to be. Sometimes we say, let's start softening. And let's like butter, and they can't relate to butter because they're beef jerky.
Right.
So it's like, okay, let's go from jerky to taffy.
Yes.
Right.
Baby steps.
Fascia. This is also something a lot of people don't know. They think, well, can I just stretch? No. Not unless you do it myofascially, which is sort of like yin yoga. You get kind of on the first edge of it. Fascia is made of both elastin and collagen. And the elastin's what's stretching, but it will go right back to that dysfunction. This is why you have to be there a long time. If you can get the collagen fibers to let go, then you will repattern the whole nervous system. And that's where the change happens.
Interesting. So much. Interesting. Is there, and again, this will have to be if anybody's like watching it on video, is there a myofascial release, easy treatment that people can do from home?
Yes.
That maybe and you'll have to share like how often to do that too.
Sure.
But is there like, what can you share, a quick
okay. So first, is I would tell people there is a complete comprehensive book on myofascial release treatment you can get on Amazon.
Okay.
So
I'll put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes. Okay, great. So two of the things that are just really easy, and this is what separates also myofascial release from, say, massage. Okay. So in massage, we're taught how to rock somebody, right? Well, in myofascial release, we call rebounding. So it's a little bit different. Our hands stay on. It's like we're rolling a barrel, and we're trying to get into things being kind of in fluid. Well, how do you do that for yourself? It's called jiggling. So you stand up and you just bounce at the knees, and you just put waves in your body. Now, this is not the same as jumping on a rebounder because now there's active muscle engagement. We want it to be very passive. So put on something fun, right? Something that makes you happy inside. 10 minutes, though. straight, 10 minutes straight. And then give yourself the gift of feeling the stillness afterwards, because that's when you feel the buzzy. You feel those light photons that are part of your system. You feel them now. And you're like, whoa, you can feel that way? This feels incredible. So that's definitely one. And you can do that as often as you want. There's no too much of that.
Okay.
It's a great thing to do, like even before a workout, or before you go
Get
to
things
stretch.
active and like activated.
Yeah, it's blood flow. Its fascia is starting to get flossed. It's really good. The other is you can initiate what's called myofascial unwinding on your own by simply stretching something or contracting something. All right. So if you were to take your arms out like this.
I'll participate.
Okay, telescope, make your fingers stretch out. So it's not that they're going back, they're telescoping out. And after a while, they may start to shake. And so I'm gonna let go of the process of the outcome. And so here we go. So that this arm's moving by itself. And then the other arm's gonna do its thing. They may not do the same thing. And if I was laying down, then my legs and torso the whole body might get into it. It's sort of like when you wake up in the morning and your body stretches and then keeps going. Okay. So this is sort of like that. And you breathe with it. And then you start to notice if you do this for like the length of maybe 1 or 2 songs, it's better than any stretch you ever did, because your body knows how it got tangled up. So it will untangle itself in the proper order. So it's not boring like 2 stretches to the left and 2 stretches to the right. And the body goes, I don't want to participate in that, because what if that tension needs to go like this and then.
Right.
And that just
a
is
little
what it
loop-de-loop
needed.
situation.
A little loop-de-loop,
Yeah.
It's like a
And
tangled necklace.
I feel like when you are in this field of body work, these things are more natural to us, because I was sharing with somebody recently, I did something very similar when I was getting up. I had gotten out the bed, or I hadn't even gotten out the bed yet, but when I woke up, I was like, my neck's kind of stiff, but also it's not just there. So as I was like moving out of the bed, I just kind of slowly twisted, but then it was like, my neck wants, turn it this way, and then your hips went this way, but then your foot wants just this way. And again, it's that like, we know that because it's like, we can feel that, but people are still learning that, especially if they're not all the way connected to their bodies. But when I tell you the adjustment that I made for myself, it popped from my occiput, like the base of my skull, all the way down to my hip. And I was just like, oh,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, most people think when something hurts, stretch it. Actually, do the opposite. Lean into the cramp, lean into the stuck. Meet it where it's at. It's sort of like a toddler. Right? If you start pulling on a toddler to try to get them to follow you, they don't want to go. But if you kind of lean into them, say, hey, and then they'll go, oh, I'm curious. I want to follow you. Yeah.
And you had taught me that when I first started treatment with you forever ago, because, you can recommend like what people can relate to with that, I think would be if somebody gets a Charlie horse, because their immediate reaction when they get a Charlie horse is not to let it happen.
Right.
But that's what you're telling people to do.
I'm telling them, hold it, squeeze it, feel it. I had one in my sleep last night on the side of my leg, and it was one of those that pulls your big toe back, right? And I'm just like, I'm getting up, I'm going into like a squat, kind of trying to compress it even more. Yeah, it works itself out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not our immediate response, not even typically. Our immediate response doesn't say
run.
Yes,
it
exactly.
says run. It says stretch, run, whatever you've got to do. But you have to feel it to heal it.
That sounds like some shit Shiana
It's
says.
actually at the bottom of my website.
Yeah.
Feel it, heal it.
Awesome.
And I know you already mentioned how MFR complements
Everything.
everything. Yeah, because it does nervous system things and stuff. But what about psychological therapy? What about going to the therapist?
Oh, do both. Okay. Especially those who are highly traumatized. Those people are getting the EMDR as well. It's fantastic. So things will happen in the EMDR session. It'll bring something to the surface. Then they'll come see me. Now they'll release it in their body. They'll come see me. They'll release something in their body. Something will float up into their consciousness. They go into the EMDR session. Now they're able to liberate that. It's beautiful. It works great with everything. Acupuncture, Reiki, yoga. It works awesome with this. In fact, I like to, I'm also a yoga instructor. So a lot of times I'll incorporate some yoga poses or breath work to help somebody become embodied. But that's some of the things I'll send them home with, is getting them to go, I never noticed that my in-breath feels this temperature. My out-breath feels this temperature. I never noticed that. And then it's like, what else am I not noticing in my life, right? So then you start going on this spiritual discovery of yourself. And you start realizing what are some of those layers, some of those patterns that keep me from doing things a certain way, or that make me do things maybe overly complicated because I thought that I had to, that everything is complicated. So then we start looking at what is this pattern, and what's a healthier way to do this?
And I speak a lot on that on here because especially women, especially women in a patriarchal driven world, we still have this idea that we're supposed to go and do a lot and keep up. And so much of our essence is lived in that receiving and relaxing and allowing.
Yes.
But when we have traumas and micro traumas and, histories of things that don't show that is a possibility, then it's hard for us to embrace that.
Yeah.
But
because we feel like we have to be strong too.
Yeah.
And so what I try to help with, like the whole because people come to me, they tell you everything. They tell you about their husband.
Even if they're not seeking treatment with you,
Right.
they might say it at the grocery store.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a complete stranger.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah. Park bench. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So it's kind of like, I like equating that whole divine feminine, divine masculine thing. And although, we like to think, we're liberated and all this kind of stuff, there are just some things I think in the wiring, right? We like that whole, what you just said, being receptive and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's things in the male wiring too. And it's to give men permission to say, look, create that safe container within which the feminine then can express and create. And then she's going to nurture you, right? So then now, let's go beyond the relationship between two people to go into yourself. How do I use my own masculine energies to create my own safe container from which in my own feminine can blossom? Yeah.
And I tell men, women all the time, like, you need creative hobbies. Like, sometimes you need to create just to create.
Yes, just for the flow of it.
Yeah, because it's one of those, there's some adults that don't even know what they enjoy because they've just been told what to try or what they might like, kind of thing. And it's like, actually go and explore that and actually see what you enjoy as a hobby or what you enjoy creating. And there's kind of like this frustration or like this, not disconnect, but there's this like hesitation with it a lot of times. Like, am I allowed to explore that? But as you're saying, it's coming from, I'm not in a safe space.
And I'm too busy taking care of everybody else. I don't have time to take care of me, or I won't make time to take care of me. I won't give myself permission to take care of me, right? And that's what this does profoundly.
What are some of the frequently asked questions you get before a session?
A lot of times, this is going to sound crazy. I don't.
Okay.
I don't, because I have a 6-minute video that someone else created.
Okay.
It's called What is Myofascial Release?
Right.
And it answers just about everything. So someone comes to me, and I'm asking them all their trauma history and all that. And then I said, what questions do you have for me? And, and I tell them a lot of the same stuff we talked about, the bunny and the hawk and all that. And most of them are like, no.
Right.
Don't really have a lot. Now, I also educate them at the end. There's a podcast that's fantastic, but another MFR therapist did on the healing crisis. See, a lot of people don't know that your healing's going to continue when you walk out the door. And that could really stir stuff up. And so you may not be feeling it in the treatment room. You might be feeling it on your way home. You might be feeling it in 2 weeks where something just feels like, I call it emotion soup. You don't even know what it is. It just feels icky, right? Or you could be feeling like you were run over by a truck. Or it could be workouts, or there's all kinds of things. But this podcast, she's excellent at describing a lot of the different things so that people really aren't caught off guard.
Yeah. We actually, in one of my episodes on here, I had a guest, Jamel. You might know Jamel,
Jamel.
Massage Jamel. And she was sharing, we spoke about healing crises and how those show up and what it may look like, because those experiences are different for everybody.
Yeah,
but again,
right.
it could be after you're leaving treatment, but it could also be a healing crisis that makes you seek treatment
Yes.
with something like MFR.
And it's not always bad. I've
Right,
had
right.
people say, I started laughing and I couldn't stop laughing for 3 hours. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic because you just liberated some joy that you wouldn't let yourself have.
Right, right. And I've shared it on here. I had a client that I trips at that had that experience. She was nervous that she was going to be crying the whole time, and she laughed hysterically the whole time. And I was like, that's because you had like repressed joy
Right.
that you didn't want to express. So it's one of those, it's not always bad. It's not always bad.
Yeah.
And what, I feel like I have all these other questions, but I also feel like I just need to ask, like, what is one thing you wish everybody should know about this kind of therapy?
It's the most authentic healing I've personally ever experienced. There's something at the cellular level because nothing's being forced on you. MFR does not force. That's the old MFR. Okay, John Barnes MFR never forces because the tissue's going to bounce back. So many times we were told to hurry up and get better, hurry up and grieve, hurry up and whatever. This is slow world. This is take all the time. Give yourself permission to just be with yourself. People appreciate that. I've held people in one position for, 45 minutes. And their whole body just felt like it just went, I've had that for me too. And it's absolutely incredible. So is this for everyone? Yes. Is it for everyone like right now? Not necessarily. There are some people, this is like a waterfall. You get to the edge and you're like, oh no, I'm going to go over the waterfall. Some people are ready. It's like, bring it. I got a paddle and a life jacket, right? And other people are like, I'm going to start pedaling backwards. I'm not ready for this right now. It's just like any other kind of healing. But when you're ready, the people who come to me aren't the people who want the fluff and buff massage.
Right.
And they're not going to get it.
They want help fixing what's going on.
They want, yes. They have tried a lot of things. They have been in the mainstream medical and have been disappointed. A man who is a fairly new client, he's not even 40, and he had to have a hip replacement. And he's got a scar. Well, his scar looks nice from the outside, looks real pretty, but it's interwoven and connecting to an appendectomy scar when he was 10. He's got horrific pain, and all the doctors are telling him it's in his head. He's been discharged from physical therapy because insurance says so.
Of course.
And he's still in excruciating pain and can't sleep, right? And so we get into there, and I'm like, did anyone ever even touch you to see this? He's like, no. They did some range of motion tests. I'm like, no wonder you're in so much pain. And I saw him sigh. And I said, how does that feel to be validated? He says, pretty good.
And I feel like the work that you're doing, the work that is really finally making some impact on a more mainstream scale, because I think a lot of people in this industry shy away from sharing it in a lot of ways, which again, thank you for being here. But it just goes to show, especially because of COVID, which I feel like this year is going to be a remix of something, some fuckery happening with something. So that's why I'm also like, please come on the show to share some things. But it shows you like the importance of really digging into these other therapies that are available, specifically when you've been told, or you're just making that up, or like there's nothing we can do. We've exhausted our options. Insurance won't, antibiotics aren't this prescription, like it's all, it's so much. And it's like, actually just sit still for a little bit and receive some support.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Finally.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the craziest things that's ever happened was like 5 years ago. And I was at Salsaritas over by Lexington Medical Center with my grandson, who at the time was like 4 or 5 years old. And we're sitting outside, and this guy walks by, and he's got beautiful paint colors splattered on his pants. And I just say to him, I go, I really like your pants. And he walks a little closer, and I notice that his left hand was like a stump. I mean, it was like fingers like this. And I said, what's going on there? And he starts to tell me his story. My grandson volunteers. Oh, my grandmother will heal you now. Then he goes and he sits and he just makes himself at home at the table next door because they've got a dog. He says, my grandmother's going to heal him now. And I just look at him and I said, can I hold your hand? And he tells me how he wasn't always a painter. He had lost his job with the DOT after 9 surgeries because he worked on the road crew and hot asphalt. His clothes got caught in the machine. It dragged him down, and it burned it all the way to the bone. He had like 9 surgeries, right? And I'm holding him, and it's starting to soften. And he's starting to shake and sweat.
And this is at the restaurant?
This is in the, at the little tables outside. He's starting to sweat. He's praying. He's like, he's feeling it. Nerve endings are reconnecting, right? 20 minutes later, he's making a fist. So we found out he and his family were in a hotel across the street. And I said, let me buy you some groceries. But my grandson had to go to the bathroom. So we go and we come back out and he's gone. And it makes me just kind of wonder maybe if angels sometimes show up like that. Because it was at a critical point for me in believing what this healing could do. Because I was like, oh, well, it could do this and it could do that. But then I got to see, no, it can do miracles.
And I love that. Thank you for being a miracle worker out here.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And of course, I'll have to ask, because obviously I'm sure people are curious to know what your medicine is.
Well, I have a dream team, and I'm glad to say you're on it.
Thank you.
All right. I make self-care the first thing I put on my calendar every week. I have a dedicated afternoon, which is usually like Thursdays.
Mondays.
Yes. And so sometimes I'm receiving MFR, sometimes I'm seeing you, sometimes I'm seeing Noemi for some acupuncture, I get a massage tomorrow, all kinds of things. The things that I do for myself are the self-treatment with the MFR, and then specifically Kundalini yoga. I've never had anything quite so incredible that leads you to ecstasy, to take you to the center of yourself, the center of the universe, to God, whatever you want to call the great mystery, and how to do a nervous system reset, maybe even as little as 1 minute, just doing some of the breath work that goes with that and the postures. So, but yeah, just making that a priority. Okay. Can't give from an empty cup,
Yes, I preach that one often.
You want to press your button?
Oh, well, yeah. Say it again.
You can't, I want to just say.
Go ahead. You can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
That sounds like some shit Shiana says.
Yeah, I actually was sharing with somebody, oh no, now my thought is gone. It was something to do with you doing your dream team. It's gone.
Well, can I tell you?
Sure.
Okay, so not long from now, my structure will be converted to a ministry, Beyond Bliss Holistic Healing.
Yay.
And I will then be, once I have that all figured out, all the paperwork, I'll be showing all of my dream team people who helped me how I did that. And if they want to do that, they can. And then I thought of some kind of a collaborative thing called Dream Team Healing Ministries. And so part of that was God told me, you don't have to wait till all the paperwork's done to start. And so I started tithing to my own ministry that's not even officially set up. And I've given about 6 treatment sessions to a veteran who's really dear to me.
Oh, yay.
Yay. And I just know that God is going to let the people show up as needed. And the whole idea is we'll have a portal for donations so that people can set up scholarship for treatment packages for people. And so, maybe, you do that, and Noemi does that, and, a bunch of us are doing that. Then we cross-pollinate. I'm like, you know what? I think you'd really benefit from what Shiana's doing. And I've got some extra funds over here that people have donated, so I'll just send them to you so you can go see Shiana.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we've done that. Like we've crisscrossed our clients in the past anyway. Like, I really think you'll benefit from seeing Shannon for this, and you've sent, so I always tell people, especially when they're not seeking like mainstream medical consulting, we might as well say consulting for that, to build that team, and I say build your toolkit, because you might need this medicine from this person and this medicine from that person, but you're definitely not going to get it all in one spot.
Right. Yeah. So, some people will be paying clients.
Right.
And then there'll be people who are the underserved. My daughter really busted me on this one. She's like, Mom, not everyone can afford you. What about people like me? What if we just need to get that straitjacket off so that we could then get to that next stage in our lives? What about people like me? So then I was just praying on it really hard. Yep. How could that happen? And it was shown to me how.
Yeah, and that's just, there's a guy, I talked about him on here forever ago, Charlie Goldsmith. Did you ever see? He had a show on TLC for a bit, The Healer, and he was doing what is probably a variation of Reiki or quantum healing where it's remote. He's not touching anything, but he says how he visualizes things and stuff, but he doesn't charge for any of his healing. He charges for courses, and he charges for he has some product I think he sells kind of thing, but selling that product allows him not to have to charge for his healing. And I was like, I'd like that eventually,
Right, it's a great model.
Yeah, but I was like, but in the meantime, I do my events and stuff to have those moments too, or I even have free events for people to participate in just to get, some nugget they might need or some tidbit that they were like, that's the little piece of information I needed for this next piece of my adventure, the next puzzle piece that they were missing. So I love it. Well, I'll be sure to include all your info in the show notes so they can check it out. Y'all know I've been talking about her for a long time, so I'm glad we finally got you on.
Yes.
And we do plan on collabing at some point. So whenever I do post about an event and I say MFR, y'all know what I'm talking about. I'll say Myofascial Release, but you'll know that it's with Shannon. So
thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you meditate and hydrate. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to Who You Callin' Holistic. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. You can find me and all my services on Shiana.com. That's SHEANAH.